The rain pounded against the window of the small suburban house in New York. As Emily finished preparing dinner, the scent of homemade lasagna filled the simple yet cozy home. She glanced at the clock on the wall, her heart tightening. It was past 9 at night, and her husband, Richard Lancaster, still hadn't come home. Richard had always been an ambitious man, determined to conquer the world when they first met. He was just a young man from a humble background full of dreams, while Emily worked at a coffee shop to help pay for her sick mother's expenses. They fell madly in love, and even without money, they were happy. Emily believed that their love was strong enough to overcome any hardship. As the years passed, Richard's career began to take off. His talent for business led him to start an investment company, and over time his fortune skyrocketed. Emily had always been by his side, supporting his decisions, sacrificing her own dreams to help him succeed. But the richer Richard became, the more distant he grew. In recent weeks, he had been cold, detached. He spent hours on the phone, left the house without saying where he was going. And when he returned, he avoided Emily's gaze. Deep down, she knew something was wrong. That night, after waiting for hours, Emily finally heard the sound of keys at the door. Her heart pounded. She rushed to the living room and saw Richard walk in, looking tired but showing no trace of guilt. "You're late again," she said, trying to keep the anguish out of her voice. Richard sighed, loosening his tie. "I had an important meeting. You know how my job is, Emily." She bit her lip, holding back tears. "Richard, I just want to understand what's happening to us. You barely look at me. You hardly talk to me. We used to be so close." He averted his gaze and walked over to the bar, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. "Things change, Emily." I changed. Those words pierced her heart like a sharp blade. You met someone else, didn't you?" Her voice trembled. Richard remained silent for a moment, then let out an impatient sigh. "Emily, I don't want to lie to you. Yes, there's someone else." Her world collapsed. "How could you do this to me? I stood by your side through every hardship. I sacrificed everything for you, Richard." He looked at her with an icy gaze. "I know. And I'm grateful for everything. But I want more, and well, you're no longer a part of that." His words hit like a punch to the gut. Emily felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "Who is she?" she asked, her throat tightening. Richard took a sip of whiskey before answering. "A model. Belladeo. She makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years." Emily felt B rise in her throat. A model, of course. Now that he had money, he wanted to live out a fantasy with a stunning woman. "So that's it. You're just going to throw me away, like I never meant anything to you." Richard didn't answer. He simply walked to the bedroom, grabbed a suitcase that was already packed, and headed for the door. "I've made my decision, Emily. You deserve someone who fits your life, and I deserve some." Richard's new life, alongside the breathtaking Bella, they attended lavish events, traveled the world, and flaunted their happiness on social media. Mutual friends started avoiding her. Emily realized that now that Richard was a millionaire, she no longer belonged in that world. She tried to move on, but the pain was crushing. At night, she wondered if Richard had ever truly loved her. And as she stared at photos of her ex-husband, beaming beside his new muse, a seed of revenge began to take root inside her. He had discarded her, but one day he would regret it. The days dragged on like an endless nightmare. Emily couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every corner of the house felt haunted by the memories of the man who once swore he loved her. The couch where they used to watch movies together, the table where they shared dinners filled with laughter, the bedroom where they made promises that now felt like lies. It was all a graveyard of memories. The humiliation was unbearable. The tabloids and gossip sites wouldn't stop talking about them. Richard Lancaster and Bella Dio were the couple of the moment. The model paraded beside the tycoon like a trophy, draped in designer gowns, diamonds, and a happiness that seemed to mock Emily's pain. She tried to ignore it, but the images were everywhere. The internet was flooded with cruel comments about how Bella was an upgrade for Richard, implying that Emily had never been good enough for a man like him. Then came the final blow, too. Weeks later, Emily went out to buy groceries at the local market, keeping her head down, trying to avoid the pitying glances and whispered remarks. But as she passed a newsstand, her eyes were drawn to a brutal headline: "Richard Lancaster finalizes divorce model." Bella Dio spotted wearing a $3 million engagement ring. Emily's stomach twisted. $3 million? Why did it hurt so much? Money had never meant anything to her, but knowing that Richard had bought a multi-million-dollar ring for Bella, while discarding her like an old burden, was a deep, cruel cut. She turned into the nearest alley and broke down in tears. But amidst the sobs, something shifted. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was fury. Emily spent days in silence, reflecting she could spend the rest of her life crying, wallowing in sorrow, or she could turn her pain into something far more powerful. One night, sitting at the old kitchen table, she picked up a notepad and started writing every memory, every sacrifice, every humiliation Richard had put her through, and beside them a single goal: revenge. But not just any revenge. She didn't want to simply hurt him. She wanted Richard to feel the same pain she had felt. She was going to destroy him. Emily had always been smart before getting married. She had dreams of becoming a businesswoman. But to support Richard, she had given it all up. Now it was time to rebuild the woman she was meant to be with the little money. She had left Emily enrolled in finance and investment courses. If Richard had become a tycoon, she could learn to play the same game at first. Submissive wife who had sacrificed everything for a man who discarded her, like an old possession? No. Now she was a powerful woman after years of hard work and relentless study. Her financial consulting firm had grown exponentially. At first, her focus was on helping women who had gone through similar situations, betrayed wives, women in need of a fresh start. But as her influence in the business world expanded and Emily realized she could go even further, she diversified her investments, built strategic alliances, and in less than 2 years, she had become a powerhouse in the financial market. Her name was now respected in the same elite circles Richard moved in. But Emily wasn't done yet. Now it was time for the final blow. Emily knew that Richard was expanding his business. He wanted to break into the tech industry and needed heavyweight investors to bring his vision to life. His new project, Lancaster Innovations, required a massive financial investment, and that's when Emily saw the perfect opportunity. Using the network she had built along her journey, she discreetly positioned herself among investors interested in Richard's project. They had no idea that Emily knew the man they were considering backing better than anyone else. But Emily knew one thing. Richard was always driven by his ego. He loved the game of business. But more than that, he loved winning. He would never suspect that. The woman he once discarded was about to become his greatest enemy. After months of carefully monitoring the situation, Emily finally got what she wanted: a meeting with Richard. But she wasn't going as Emily Lancaster. That name no longer existed. Now she was Emily Carter, CEO of a billion-dollar firm and one of the most influential women in finance. When Richard received word that the renowned Emily Carter was interested in investing in his project, he was saint-static. He knew that if he could secure her backing, other investors would follow. What he didn't know was that Emily Carter was the same woman he had walked away from without a second glance. On the night of the meeting, Emily chose her outfit with surgical precision: a sleek black dress, flawless makeup, and a gaze that was cold and calculating. She was no longer the fragile wife who had once cried alone at home. When she arrived at the luxurious restaurant where the meeting was set to take place, an assistant greeted her and led her to the private table. And then she saw him. Richard Lancaster was still a charming man dressed in expensive suits with a confident smile, but something about him had changed. Maybe it was the marks of time, or maybe it was the uncertainty of a man starting to realize that his empire wasn't as solid as it seemed. He stood up to greet her, completely unaware of who was sitting before him. "Miss Carter, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. I've heard a lot about you," Richard said, extending his hand. Emily shook it firmly, her smile enigmatic. "The pleasure is all mine, Mr. Lannister." Richard pulled out a chair for her, having no idea. "Finally meet you. I've heard a lot about you," Richard said, extending his hand. Emily shook it firmly, her smile enigmatic. "The pleasure is all mine, Mr. Lannister." Richard pulled out a chair for her, having no idea he was about to face the biggest downfall of his life. Throughout dinner, Richard confidently presented his project, speaking like a man who believed he was in complete control. He explained how Lancaster Innovations had the potential to revolutionize the tech industry, promising astronomical returns. Emily listened intently, pretending to be impressed. "It sounds like an interesting proposal, Mr. Lancaster. I do enjoy investing in innovative ideas. But tell me, what are the risks involved?" she asked. "Testing him." Richard smiled as if he had already rehearsed the answer. "Almost none, of course. There are always challenges in this sector, but with the right investors, this will be one of the most profitable ventures in the coming years." Emily leaned forward, slightly narrowing her eyes. "Almost none, you say? And what about your accumulated debts over the past few months, or the multi-million-dollar contract you recently lost?" Richard blinked a few Time's caught off guard. How do you know about that? Emily smiled, taking a sip of her wine before replying. I do my homework before investing, Mr. Lancaster. I know more about your company than you think. The tension on his face became evident. But that's not a problem. He tried to brush it off. With a right investment, these minor setbacks will be resolved. Emily leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with elegance. Minor setbacks. I'd call it an impending financial collapse. Richard went pale. What do you mean by that? Emily placed an envelope on the table. Inside were documents detailing every financial failure of Richard's company, every debt, every strategic mistake, every budget shortfall. He picked up the papers and started flipping through them, sweat forming on his forehead. How did you get this? He asked, incredulous. Emily tilted her head slightly and smiled. I know you, Richard. I know how you do business, your habits, your weaknesses. I've spent years studying how you operate. That was when Richard finally looked at her, really looked at her. And in that moment, it hit him. Emily, his name escaped his lips in a shocked whisper. She smiled, satisfied with the panic on his face. Yes, Richard, your former wife, the woman you threw away like she was nothing. Richard was silent for a moment, his mind struggling to process what was happening. You planned this. Emily leaned forward, her eyes as cold as ice. No, you handed this to me on a silver platter. Your arrogance brought you here. Did you really think you could destroy me without consequences, that I'd stay in that house forever crying over you? Richard swallowed hard. For the first time, he wasn't in control. Emily slowly stood up, grabbing her purse. I'm not investing in you, Richard. In fact, I'll make sure no serious investor puts a single cent into your project. Your company will sink, and I'll have front row seats to watch.